Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Over decades, the Berlin Wall had stood, dividing the people of East and West Germany, who were separated by clashing political parties. Following World War II, tensions flared, leading into the Cold War and the formation of the wall that separated Eastern communism from Western democracy and capitalism. Only starting in 1989 would the German Democratic Republic relent to opening up the borders between the two sides. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the end of the Soviet bloc and the Cold War. Democracy and capitalism had triumphed over their rival communist counterparts. Unfortunately, this victory also brought tragedy as Eastern Europe struggled to define itself apart from Soviet control. On the night of August 13, 1961, tragedy fell over Berlin, splitting the capital. The East German government had begun the construction of a barrier to close the border between East and West Berlin. They wanted to show their power by building the wall, a symbol of freedom lost and independence quenched. The people did not stand by this tragedy, as the mayor of West Berlin, Willy Brandt, stated,
"The concrete columns, the barbed wire, the death strips, the watchtowers, and the machine guns, those are the hallmarks of a concentration camp. It will not stand."
Many tried to escape by jumping over the wall, digging under it, or even driving a car through it. But why were so many people trying to leave? The German Democratic Republic Party, also known as the GDR, that controlled the eastern section of Germany, was the main cause of this epidemic. Following World War II, Russia was given territory in Germany, and the GDR came springing up to represent the USSR's ideals. Despite rebuilding, East Germany would watch their economy fall with the expansion of the GDR.
Things became very much better in the West, but not so much, or not as fast in the East, because in the East, the Russians took everything away.
In addition, many of the young educated workers were fleeing, which added to the economic fall. Walter Albrecht, the leader of the East German Party, had realized this problem, and in May of 1952, the East German government shut down the open border between East and West Germany. Yet still, people continued to flee into West Germany.
The people in the East who had the ability left and went to the West because they found out that life was much more free and more democratic. And so in the West they could work and improve their standard of living.
Finally, on the night of August 13th, 1961, East Germany decided to build the wall, sealing themselves away completely from the Western world. People in Berlin woke up to find themselves in a separated capital. Through time, the tragedy deepened for the people of East Berlin.
So I think East Berliners suffered from relative privation compared to their Western counterparts. They couldn't get as much in the stores, they couldn't get the quality of goods and foods, things like that. But I think the main deprivation they suffered from is the sense that they were really, that they were in prison, that they were jailed.
As the years passed, the state of East Germany diminished, leaving the people within their land starving. World leaders spoke out about the tragedy of the wall, including the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. In his speech on June 26, 1963, in West Berlin, titled Ich bin ein Berliner, he had stated,
"Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us."
Continuing on, he tried to raise the spirits of the citizens of Berlin and the world when he said,
"All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner."
Despite Western leaders speaking out against this tragedy, many East German leaders saw the wall as a triumph. GDR head of state Erich Honecker advocated for the wall when he emphasized,
"The wall will be standing in 50 and even in 100 years.
Although the wall would not stand for that long, The tragedy that it brought would affect the citizens of East Berlin for nearly the next 30 years. But by the late 1980s, the Cold War was beginning to thaw and a triumph was on the horizon. In 1987, US President Ronald Reagan made a visit to West Berlin, where he famously urged Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the wall. In addition, he raised the spirits of the people in Berlin and urged them to continue to fight for freedom.
Yes, across Europe this wall will fall, for it cannot withstand faith, it cannot withstand truth. The wall cannot withstand freedom.
In 1989, the tide was turning, with their main supporter, Russia, diminished and refusing to support the government. The GDR was left at the mercy of the people. In fear of the party dying, Gunter Schabowski, the country's spokesman, had let slip at a meeting that they were planning to reopen the borders immediately. Afterwards, people in East Berlin rushed to the wall, hoping to get past. Overwhelmed by the crowd of people, the border guards let the people pass, without passports. It was on that Friday, November 9th, where over 2 million crowded the streets in triumph, celebrating their freedom, the freedom that they had lost for the past 30 years. Not only was the wall being opened a physical triumph, but it was a symbolic one as well.
Was this symbol of the East-West divide, to have that finally come down, seemed to suggest that this dangerous conflict that had dominated the world for so long was finally coming to an end, and that in some ways that the last legacies of the violence of World War II was finally over, and that kind of Germany and Europe could really be at peace.
Now, with the triumph of the wall opening, East Germany was able to start the process of rebuilding.
Also die Unterschiede zwischen Ost und West waren gravierend. Die Straßen waren nur schlecht, die Häuser waren zum Teil verfallen, die hatten ja oft keine Farbe zum die streichen. Man hat schon den Unterschied gesehen. Aber ein paar Jahre später war Ostberlin eigentlich der schönere Teil von Berlin.
However, this triumph was unfortunately short-lived, as tragedy again soon struck. Eastern Germany's initial euphoria of freedom had been quickly extinguished.
And so when the reunification came, a lot of those businesses, factories, and other things in East Germany shut down, and there was widespread unemployment. It was very difficult for many East Germans in the aftermath of the reunification economically.
Despite their efforts to rebuild, within 3 years, 71% of the people in Eastern Germany had lost their jobs. By 1991, 1.3 million jobs were lost, and millions more were lost in the following years. Not only were people losing their jobs, but the cost of living was on the rise. This was a major tragedy in the history of the wall. The lessons of the Berlin Wall continue to affect the world we live in today. Its impact has taught the world to realize how building walls sometimes has unintended consequences.
I think what we find now is that there are more and more walls being built on borders around the world, not just on the border between the United States and Mexico. There's kind of aspiration toward building a wall there, but between India and Bangladesh, in Northern Ireland, between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. So this idea of wall building as a way of reinforcing the power of states seemed to be something that is re-emerging or gaining more credibility. And I think as a historian who looks at Berlin, what I would really urge people to think about is the ways in which walls have unintended consequences. And they do things that the people who build them don't really anticipate.
When people think about the Berlin Wall, they remember how it fell and the impact it had on the world. They think about how it represented the suppression of freedom and the tyranny of the East German government. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked a triumph for freedom and Western democracy. However, tragedy followed in its aftermath. The opening of the wall may have been a bright light in the dark history of our past, but it had its share of devastation and tragedy along the way.